We're here to talk about the Guama and DEQ and how that's all going. And I know that under the Oregon Clean Water Act of 1989, it put DEQ in charge of setting up the Guama. How do you think that's all going?
Yes, so as you said, that's how that act was set up, and the groundwater management area in that basin, the Lower Umatilla Basin, was established in 1990. By statute, that sets up a couple of requirements for DEQ, one of which I know you're aware of, Pat, is that we have to set up a local advisory committee. And the idea is that that advisory committee would advise the state agencies, particularly DEQ, but also Department of Agriculture, in terms of local actions that can be taken, should be taken, to help improve the concentration limits. The Guama is designated when the nitrate levels hit a certain level that EPA defines as unhealthy and inappropriate for drinking water consumption. So that's kind of the process that gets kicked off.
According to the history on the site, it says that the purpose is restoring and improving groundwater quality by decreasing nitrate concentrations to less than 7 milligrams per liter, which it's not even close to doing. So is it working?
Yes. So DEQ's been monitoring over the years, and I think you're aware of that. You've seen a lot of our data, and that's exactly right. That's what our data is showing. It's not a good story over the last 30 years of collected data. Yeah.
How can that be?
Right. For the most part, I would say a lot of the levels, we test certain areas and they're okay, other areas are not. And we know that domestic wells are at levels that are not safe for drinking water. So I would say DEQ's role over this time period has been that sampling, the analysis. We put out annual reports about the contamination levels. We send the results to the domestic well owners so that they are aware. We notify the counties, we notify the legislature. So we've been in the area, we've been doing this. You're right, things are not improving. And so I think what's really happening today is a concerted effort to bring in more agencies to look at more diverse authorities. As I think you know, DEQ does not have authority over drinking water, and the really complicating factor with those domestic wells, in addition, is that technically nobody has regulatory authority over the domestic wells themselves. They are private by definition, and so unlike a municipal water system that is required to deliver safe drinking water, those private wells are up to private individuals. In Oregon, we know that bacteria, arsenic, and nitrate are all issues that the health authority recommends that people test for in those private wells. And in this region, it's a real problem. The nitrate is a real problem. And I think that we really need to, I think the red flag has been raised on the data that we've been producing. I think people are starting to pay attention and say, hey, this is beyond an environmental problem. This is a public health problem. There's people drinking out of these private wells, but nonetheless, what can we do to help improve the conditions of that groundwater? And most importantly, even if it's a long-term solution to improve groundwater, which it absolutely is, unfortunately, what do we do today? What do we do in the short term to ensure that people have access to safe drinking water? And I really appreciate our partners at OHA for stepping in and making sure that we can do that as a state.
But back to the Guama, they've been meeting for almost 30 years.
The advisory committee.
Yep. They've come out with 2 reports, both recommending voluntary steps.
Yes.
In sort of the magical hope that things will get better, and it's still not getting better. Is that committee, is it even worthwhile? Should they even be meeting? Because they give the appearance of doing something when in fact nothing is changing?
I appreciate that question. I think working with the committee, to me, is an area I've identified that where I would like DEQ to improve. So the committee, as you've noted, they've come out with 2 different action plans. There was a long span of years between the first and the second one. So I think we can look back and say there should have been, maybe more plans coming out of that. The other thing that I've really begun to recognize is that, the committee has been really acting mostly on their own and a little more separately in terms of the actions that they are looking at and the actions that the state is looking at. And so what I want to do is really bring those together more. That, I believe that's the intention, is that it is a state advisory group. And so let's look at what are the regulatory mechanisms that we're already doing. The committee is permitted to suggest more regulatory mechanisms for agencies to potentially carry out. And so far, as you say, it's been voluntary mechanisms.
Yeah, which are clearly not working. And there's been some criticism that the committee in the past, and still to some extent today, is loaded with industry people that have a dog in the fight and maybe don't want things to change.
Yeah, well, we recognized actually a couple years ago that the makeup of the committee may not be conducive to all of the solutions that we're seeking. And whether it is or isn't conducive to the solutions, I believe that the makeup of that committee needs to include people who live in the community and are drinking the water, aren't necessarily connected to maybe agriculture or the industries there, but are just people who live in that area and have concerns. I think it needs to also include local health officials and county seats, tribal folks who want to have a say and learn about what's going on in the area. Again, I think for too long it's been considered an environmental issue, which it certainly is, but it's also a really critical public health issue. And the more voices that we can have on that committee that are considering the options, I think the better.
I think right now maybe there's only one public member on the committee. So specifically, do you think that should change? Should there be more? Are you going to change the makeup?
I think we've just recently changed the makeup to change several of these positions. Also changed the chair, brought in some more, university expertise. So there are more local voices, which I'm really glad about. I think it's evolving though. Like I say, I think it's an area for DEQ to consider. How do we make improvements in what that committee is doing, and how do we make sure that the agencies and the committee are really connected and collaborating on solutions? So I think we're at the precipice of that opportunity right now, and certainly I would like to hear from the committee themselves too, if they think they need some more members and some more perspectives on that group.
And then turning to some of the things that you do regulate,
yes.
The Port of Morrow, it's an easy target, it's public, all that stuff is documented. Yeah. How is it that the DEQ allowed them to violate their permit so many times for so many years before kind of calling them on the carpet?
Well, so the port has been regulated for many years. What's to my understanding, what's really occurred is just quite a bit of expansion in the last 15 years in particular. So we first started seeing violations in terms of excess nitrogen loading in 2010. So they did receive a notice of permit violation at that time, and that's really what started the cycle of enforcement. We've issued 4 penalties to the port since that time. So most people are really thinking about the most recent one, the big one, the $2.1 million penalty, which is one of the 3 highest penalties this agency has ever issued in its entire history. But there were 3 penalties prior to that and several orders from the department that related to upgrades to their systems, better monitoring, and better reporting, and really asking the port to get their arms around the system that they are. They are a wastewater treatment system that hasn't employed treatment yet, if you will, right? It's a land application system, and that's allowed. That's allowed by law, but the rate of the application is what has been at issue, and
especially in that type of soil.
In that type of soil. In that type of soil. Absolutely, you're right. That's the crop uptake is critical in that area to ensure, and that's what we've really done recently with the port, is in a very directive way, very much dialed in precisely on every field, how much they can be applying and requiring reporting for every field, requiring that treatment facilities are in place.
But even now, you're allowing them to spread during the winter when the uptake is very small. And even with that, they're still violating the permits. It's getting down farther than it's supposed to.
There are some new aspects to that, though. The winter irrigation is only allowed for another winter cycle. And so what we've done with the permit renewal.
Sorry to interrupt, but why allow it at all? The people out there are saying, look, this is a poison that's affecting our water. You're making us sick. Why not just stop it?
It's a very logical question. It's one I would have myself as a member of the community. I would definitely have that question as well. So to best explain that, so the port is taking in all of this industrial wastewater, as we know, from food processors, and it's a connection to all of the agricultural businesses really in the area. They bring this in, and when they go to land apply, winter irrigation has been identified as a time when the crops really can't uptake as well. So in looking at that, we said, you've got to install treatment, and you've got to increase your lagoon storage, and more acreage is also appropriate if it's low risk acres. So we worked with them to identify a plan that would get them to create all of that needed infrastructure to stop winter irrigation. Between now and then, for the winter application period, they are restricted to applying on low risk acres. These are areas where there is not a drinking water well around, and they are south of the areas where there are domestic wells. So it's really a system where they have got to focus on those low risk acres, and there are high penalties if they don't. So
but you sort of strayed away from the question of why not just tell them to stop until all that stuff's in place. All the treatment, so they can take the nitrates out of the water and all that and make it safe again.
Well, there's two reasons. I think you've seen the pie chart, and you're aware of how much the port actually contributes.
Something like 5%
to the overall.
8%. Yeah.
Well, that's all land appliers, is about 4.6%.
Okay.
So generously, let's say the port is that entire 4.6%. If they stop all of their land application tomorrow, those wells are not clean. That drinking water is not really any better. So to me, we have a lose-lose proposition if the port is shut down or prohibited from taking food processed water because we impact the food processors. My understanding is half the people in that region are employed directly or indirectly by the port, the food processors, and the farmers that produce the food. So the lose-lose there is that we impact jobs, and we do not improve groundwater. We do not improve drinking water. I want a win-win in this area. The win-win is that people are drinking safe water, healthy water, and that we work with the port on sustainable solutions, that we require that they put in sustainable treatment and infrastructure systems that they have never had before. So that's what I'm working toward. And right now we have the ability to provide people with that safe drinking water through OHA, and we're committed to continuing that program.
It is interesting that it's such a big economic giant out there. Mm-hmm. I think that if this were happening in a different part of the state, maybe they would be treated different, or no? Because, and I'm not saying that as a criticism, I realize there is a balancing act. if you shut down the port and all the farms and all the CAFOs out there, there's no economy. So how do you regulate this and stop the continued pollution without destroying the economy? I'm sure that's part of the balancing act.
Well, actually, our enforcement is really, the enforcement at DEQ is really about creating a level playing field for the regulated community. So I don't think we're treating them differently. What we do is we work with sources when they have a compliance problem. We talk to them, how do you want to fix this? What's a logical plan for fixing this? We also ratchet up penalties over time, which you've seen with the port. So those are both very common practices.
But it sounds like you were saying at one point it's the economy, we don't want to shut them down and have half the people lose their jobs. But now you're saying it.
What I'm saying is the result. You were proposing that what if you just stop the winter irrigation? I'm saying the result of that doesn't make sense.
Okay.
It doesn't make environmental or public health sense.
Okay.
It doesn't change the health of the water that would be coming through those wells. And that's something that I think we have to all get our arms around, because if we continue to focus on certain sectors and tell ourselves that if we just fix this little piece or this little piece, that people are actually gonna have safe drinking water, we're doing ourselves a disservice. We have to really look at this holistically. It is my job. I need to be held accountable to holding permittees in that region accountable. There's no doubt about it, and I'm committed to doing that in my job. Any land applier in that region needs to be held accountable by DEQ. That's absolutely our job. But I want to look at the whole picture and make sure that we are actually delivering results.
Okay, so the animal feedlots. A lot of people don't even understand what that's all about, but you have a whole thousands of cows, you got a lot of poop and pee, and that gets spread out onto the fields, which in limited amounts is healthy for the plants. And they, I know, have regulations, but then there's the farmers as well. So when you're talking about all land appliers, why can't you tell them all, back off a little bit? Well, it's technically not in my authority. The legislature has given agricultural water quality programs to the Department of Agriculture. So Department of Agriculture issues and follows up with compliance and enforcement for all CAFO permits, confined animal feeding operation permits. And they also have the jurisdiction in terms of irrigated agriculture. But as you know, there's not a permitting system in place for irrigated agriculture. Yeah. So can't you call those guys up and say, hey, Department of Ag, this is killing us. We got to get together and get a program going here.
We work with them weekly with regard to this situation. So I think one of the bright spots, if there can be one in this situation today, in the seat I'm sitting in today, is the collaboration amongst the state agencies. We, DEQ, Department of Ag, Water Resources Department, the Oregon Health Authority, are all working together collaboratively on this issue in a way that we haven't in the past. And I wanted to be specific on the authorities, but it's not to say, hey, that piece isn't mine or that piece isn't mine. That's not how we work together. We all sit down to problem solve and figure out where do our respective authorities lie. For the Department of Agriculture, one of the new things that they're doing is they are really focusing some new resource on the Guama area and looking at the area plans that they have in that area. And that means working with the local farmers and the producers to talk about their agronomic rates and how they're applying and offering technical assistance and educating on how they could do things so that the groundwater is impacted less. So the Department of Agriculture has really been a great partner in looking at how we can do things better.
And the committee continues to come out with volunteer suggestions for agriculture and everything else. Would it make a difference if they did mandatory things, or am I thinking they're more powerful than they are?
It's a great question. Again, back to my desire to kind of bring all of this together and work with the committee more. I think those are discussions that we can have. I don't think that's off the table. I think they can suggest those, and then we need to figure out again, where does that fit within our authorities? Any new suggestion, we would have to evaluate that and see if it's possible. It's really important that we're working with the counties as well. The counties this is their region, and understanding where they may want to do some things and respecting that as well, I think is really important. So I don't think that's off the table. I think I believe that any suggestions that could be really good, sustainable ideas are welcome for what to do here. This is a public health crisis, and
it's been going on for 30 years.
Yes, and I'm really I'm energized by the work that the agencies are doing together and the collaboration. I'm thankful for the on-the-ground work that some of the community groups have been doing. They've been doing a lot of door knocking and educating, and for people who really don't want to interact with government or are unsure about getting their well tested, the community groups are playing a really significant role in getting that education piece out there, letting them know this is free. This is just to see whether your drinking water is healthy or not, and if it's not, we want to get you clean drinking water. So the partnerships are invaluable, and they are critical to any future solutions.
Okay, cool. Gonna cheat at my notes here for a second.
Sure.
In one of the reports I saw from, I think it's the meetings that you guys are doing with EPA, DEQ was saying one of the problems is that our groundwater resources are limited. Basically, you don't have enough people, I think, is what I was getting from that. So what do you need? What would it take to get this thing under control, to stop the pollution from getting worse?
Well, some good news on that front. We've been having conversations. DEQ, Department of Agriculture, and the Oregon Health Authority have been having conversations with the legislature. And in the last long session in 2023, we did receive some new resources. So in particular, we have a coordinator position in our Eastern region, specifically to work on groundwater issues, and their focus will be the Guama early on. We have other Guamas in the state that they'll work on as well, but that will be their focus. We also received a position for an agronomist to help us with some of that soil science work that we need to do that's critical for permitting. We also received some positions for on-site septic work, and then another position to evaluate some reuse options. So overall, we have some new positions. Resourcing has been a challenge. At times, we've not even had the resourcing in our laboratory to do as much sampling and analysis as we have wanted to. Again, I think an opportunity we have with folks talking about this, with reporting on this, with community groups talking to us about this, is it really does, it really raises awareness. And I think that will help the agencies to secure more resources to work on this issue. But we have to keep in mind the resources we have also in community groups in the counties, and make sure that we're working together to really leverage all of the resources.
Okay, cool. And then finally, there was a note about a lack of coordination on groundwater data, different groups taking different samples, and it's not one singular place that it's accessible for everybody. What's the deal with that? It sounds like the good old silos, that everybody's got their thing and nobody's sharing.
Well, no, actually, it's been a great conversation with EPA in terms of, hey, let's unearth what issues we have, and the agencies said that readily. We do have these different databases and different missions, and therefore we're going to be tracking different things. Department of Environmental Quality is going to be tracking quality. Water Resources Department that issues water rights, they're going to be tracking more quantity. So the goal there in raising this issue to EPA was to say we could use some help with a system that would better coordinate all of our data, because the power of being able to overlay the quantity, the quality, well infrastructure, all of these pieces it just would be very valuable to the state. So that's an area we're really hoping for some help from EPA on, and they have committed to helping us coordinate that data.
Okay, and I know you got to go, so last question.
Sure.
How do we get out of this thing? What's the solution? How long does it take?
A magic wand.
That would be handy. They seem to be in short supply, though.
A magic wand. Pat, there is no magic wand. There's not one that I can see. If I saw it, I would make it happen. I really would. But I'll tell you what I see as the short and medium and long-term plan that I think is what's necessary. The short term absolutely is maintaining free access to sampling, testing, and drinking water for anyone in the region who needs it and wants it. That's got to be number one. That's short term. That is happening right now, and that's going to continue. I'll jump to the long and come back to the medium. Long term is this collaboration I've been talking about amongst the agencies to look at long-term sustainable solutions for the groundwater itself. That's going to take decades and sustained effort. The medium-term piece that I am really looking forward to exploring with the counties is how do we use the data we've collected now at these different households and look at what kind of infrastructure could we put in that would get some folks off of these wells entirely, just to remove that possibility of, is it contaminated now, is it not, having that change over time. And the counties are working on that. They do have planners who are looking at the data, and that's a collaborative effort, again, amongst all of us, to say, where can we put in some infrastructure? Which neighborhoods could be connected to city drinking water that is treated? Where are there opportunities for neighborhoods to have their own community system? Where are those places that those two opportunities are not available? And perhaps we need to look at a better well that accesses deeper waters that are safe. So those are the conversations that I'm really looking forward to in terms of medium-term solutions for the area. I look forward to continuing this conversation with the community and with everyone who has an interest in it as yourself, because the more that we talk about the issues that we're having there, I believe the more good ideas we can get and the more people we can get involved to help.